Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this teleconference. Now we're going to explore some of the wonders of mystical Turkey. And we'll begin by getting a lay of the land. We'll look at a map of Turkey. And here you can see in the part that has the red rectangle around it, that's all of Turkey. And up in the upper left, you can see right around Istanbul, there's a small green square around that. And the green square is the small amount of Turkey that is in Europe. And that's about 3% of the landmass, and 97% is in Asia. And again, this is just so we get a feel for where Turkey is before we begin our exploration. As you can see, Turkey is surrounded by water on three sides. There's the Black Sea on the north, and then the Mediterranean and Aegean seas to the south and the west, and the Sea of Marmara, which sits between the European and Asian parts of the country. You can see the countries there. Bulgaria is to the northwest, Greece to the west, Georgia to the northeast, Armenia, Iran, and Azerbaijani, an exclave of Nakhchivan to the east, and Iraq and Syria to the southeast. Turkey is about 1.2 times the size of the state of Texas. Turkey became the Republic of Turkey in 1923 following the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And in 2022, the official name in English was changed to the Republic of Turkey, with it spelled Turkiye. Turkey has been known by many other names throughout history, especially Anatolia, and this is still the name of the peninsula that makes up the majority of the land area of Turkey. It was also known as Asia Minor. And in this teleconference, we are going to focus on some of the more mystical aspects of this fascinating land. And we're going to go directly to one of the most mystical sites, not just in Turkey, but in the world, back to the mist of time, to Gobekli Tepe. And we'll see this in the next slide. And this is a map. You can see Istanbul up on the upper left, and where the red arrow is on the right, this is Gobekli Tepe. The blue lines show the route of our recent Rosicrucian journey through Turkey. And where this presentation is not starting with the first places we visited, instead it's going back farthest in time to Gobekli Tepe. And the next slide will show you what Gobekli Tepe looked like when it was first excavated. This is the oldest known monumental temple complex in the world. Here we see before the cover was added to the excavation site, and the next slide shows what it looks like today. So people who come to visit go underneath this protective covering, and we'll see in the next slide, this is a shot of what visitors are able to experience. Gobekli Tepe dates back to the end of the last ice age. It was first inhabited around 9,600 BCE. That's 11,600 years ago. And it remained inhabited for about 1,600 years, making it what many consider to be the oldest known monumental temple complex in the world. And amazingly, this structure predates Stonehenge by at least 6,000 years. The 20-acre site in Mesopotamia features massive T-shaped limestone pillars, which we can see in the next shot. And these are intricately carved with animals and abstract symbols. 4 enclosures have been excavated so far, but geophysical surveys show that at least another 16 exist. Some of the pillars weigh 50 tons and are 20 feet tall. Now, this is amazing for architecture today, let alone 11,000 years ago. The centers of the circular temples usually possess 2 T-shaped obelisks facing each other, and you can see those in the image here. Some of these have human-like elements like hands, arms, and clothing. And if we look at the next slide, you can see on the side, it's a little hard to see in this image, but on the side there, that gives the impression of arms and then hands in the front. The site was first recorded in modern times in an archaeological survey in 1963, but people didn't realize its significance. Then in 1994, Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute rediscovered the site and recognized its significance. He called these T-shaped stones very powerful beings, possibly ancestors or deities. The T's may represent shoulders or heads. Schmidt wrote, if deities existed in the minds of early Neolithic people, there is an overwhelming probability that the T shape is the first known depiction of deities. End quote. The T's may represent shoulders or heads. There's a debate over the site's exact original purpose. Some consider it a spiritual gathering site for Stone Age hunter-gatherers, while others say it functioned as part of a larger communal site that catalyzed the development of agriculture and permanent settlement. Gobekli Tepe challenges conventional timelines by showing that complex spiritual and social organization emerged before, not after, the rise of farming societies. People came to this sacred site before they settled down. It was a pilgrimage destination. They didn't develop their civilization and then create their spiritual practice. The spiritual practice came first. Klaus Schmidt believed Gobekli Tepe was a ritual center. He referred to it as a cathedral on a hill. It is the earliest known human-built holy place. The location is 50 feet above the nearby area, which is 1,000 feet above the valley below, where, according to Smithsonian Magazine, there would have been herds of gazelles and other wild animals, gently flowing rivers, which attracted migrating geese and ducks, fruit and nut trees, and fields of barley and wild wheat varieties, such as emmer and einkorn. Imagine what a paradise this would have seemed like. In the next image, we see these are aurochs, which are wild cattle that unfortunately have become extinct. But that view that we just saw would have been filled with animals like these aurochs. This area is on the northern edge of the Fertile Crescent that we've all heard about, which is an area of mild climate and arable land that would have attracted hunter-gatherers from around the much broader area. Klaus Schmidt stated that this view that we saw before, they're looking out over a hunter's dream. In addition to the humanoid figures, the pillars of the enclosures are carved with an array of realistic images in both high and low relief of foxes, and we can see in the next image some of the carvings of the animals, boars, the aurochs, these large, powerful wild cattle that I just mentioned, snakes, scorpions, hyenas, and vultures. In his book, The Immortality Key, Brian Muraruski wonders if dancing and hallucinogenic drinks consumed at Gobekli Tepe may have induced an altered state of consciousness, which drew the hunter-gatherers to this place for 16 centuries. In his book, he writes, civilization itself may have begun with a ritual potion, a sacrament fit for the first community-wide celebration of the dead. Its intoxicant effects could have created a sense of cohesion among the living while establishing a mind-altering link to their ancestors. End quote. Research has been conducted at this site on residue that's been found in ancient barrels. However, the analysis is challenging since the samples are over 10,000 years old. When our group was there, we attuned with the energy of the place using a Rosicrucian technique. And no one can say for sure what inspired these ancient people to build this temple complex, or why generation after generation returned for 1,600 years. In any case, though, it's inspiring to try to connect with our ancient ancestors from so many millennia ago. This is an image of a fox that is carved on one of the main pillars there. And again, this is a shot of what it looked like before the cover was placed over the excavation area. Next, we're going to travel to Catalhoyuk, which you can see on the map here where the red arrow is. Although this is 2,000 years newer than Gobekli Tepe, it's still 9,500 years old. So Catalhoyuk was first inhabited around 7,500 BCE and remained so for about 1,800 years. So both of these sites were used for 16 and 1,800 years. This makes it one of the earliest known settlements. There is a fantastic museum at Catalhoyuk, and it demonstrates how long ago this was. 9,500 years equals 376 generations in the past. For comparison, the ancient Greeks lived about 100 generations ago. And the founding of the United States was about 10 generations ago. And here we have at Catalhoyuk people from 376 generations in the past. There's a debate over how many people lived in Catalhoyuk, but recent estimates suggest that between 600 and 800 people lived on the East Mound. The site, which covers 34 acres, and we can see this in the next image, consists of houses that were packed together. They were built wall to wall without streets, with access through rooftops. And this suggested a highly cooperative and egalitarian community. So the ladder that you see here goes to a hole in the top of the house, and then people left the house that direction. There were no doors like at the bottom of the ladder where people would walk around in the house. There were no doors there. Everybody exited from the top of their house, and then the tops of these houses were connected. In good weather, many daily activities may have also taken place on the rooftops, which may have formed a plaza. In later periods, large communal ovens appear to have been built on these rooftops. This is what the excavated area looks like today. And our next slide. This shows from outside the community. So again, you don't see any doors here, but you do see the ladders on each of the houses. That's how people would have entered their homes. Archaeologists debate whether Catalhoyuk was primarily a domestic village, a prototype city, or a ritual center, as many homes contain shrines, murals, and burials beneath the floor. So in many of the homes, there was artwork on the walls, similar to how we would place artwork on our walls. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Also, under a number of the houses, there were the remains of the people's ancestors. So they would bury people under their houses. Its sophisticated art, symbolism, and social organization mark Catalhoyuk as a key milestone in humanity's transition from nomadic life to settled agricultural civilization. Over time, houses were renewed by partially demolishing them and then rebuilding the foundation on top of the rubble, which was how this mound, today the area is a big mound, how that built up. And there are as many as 18 levels of settlement that have been uncovered. So there, where we would see these houses here, there are 17 more levels of civilization, levels of housing underneath what we would see in this model. This 8,000-year-old female figurine discovered at Catalhoyuk is one of the most iconic artifacts of Neolithic archaeology, and she dates back to about 6,000 BCE. The piece is 7 inches tall and was mostly intact. You can tell that the head looks a little different and the area by her left hand is a little bit different. Those were missing and were added later, but the rest of the figure is from 6,000 years BCE. She is sitting between two leopards or lions with her hands on their heads, suggesting power and a strong social position. The round shape between her legs might represent the head of a child being born, or maybe the skull of an esteemed ancestor. Turkish Archaeological News quotes Ian Hodder of Stanford University, who was the previous head of the Catalhoyuk excavations, as saying the following. When James Mellart, and he was the person who discovered this site in the 1960s, discovered opulent female imagery, he presumed it represented the mother goddess, the powerful naked woman sitting on a seat of felines with her hands resting on their heads, seems to conjure up precisely the tamer of nature, so well known from historical mythologies in the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Egypt. Now, Hodder has a different view. He says, more recently, cultural anthropologists have withdrawn from making such sweeping generalizations because human groups living today or in the recent past offer a diverse picture when it comes to the roles of the two sexes. Furthermore, anthropology provides no substantive evidence for true matriarchs, societies that are matriarchal. Rather than talking simplistically about matriarchies and patriarchies, we should expect, according to the ethnographic evidence, a more complicated picture, which is just what we find at Catalhoyuk. End quote. So this is the basis of a big controversy. In the 1960s, archaeologist James Mellart proclaimed this figure was of a goddess and this was a female-based society, a matriarchy. Thousands of other female figurines were also discovered here. This influenced many scholars and women's studies research, and many groups came to revere this goddess and this matriarchy, this ancient society that was ruled by women. However, there were issues with James Mellart's methods and his credibility, and the excavations were shut down for 30 years. Then in 1993, Ian Hodden, who I just quoted, he's a professor and director of Stanford's anthropology department, led a 25-year project which focused on, among other things, seeing this site without bias. So just looking at the facts and seeing just what is there. As I just stated, he felt generalizations had been made, and he saw no proof that this was a matriarchal society. When another female figurine was found years later, he proposed that she might have been a revered elder, with her body showing years of fecundity and enough lifetime without labor reflected in her untoned body. But he did not think she was a goddess or that this proved that this society was matriarchal. He suggests that the society was more egalitarian earlier, but at the time of this later statue that the team found, some people had more power than others, but it was not what we would consider a matriarchy, and she was not a goddess. So this created a big controversy. And the research that Ian Hodden and others had conducted for 25 years concluded recently. And after that time, there's something new to add to the mystery. This year, DNA research shows a matrilineal social structure in Catalhoyuk. So there is DNA evidence that shows that the houses were lived in and passed on from mother to daughter. And how can we know this? Well, remember that their ancestors were buried under their houses. And the DNA shows that mothers and daughters are in the same houses, not fathers and sons. So this does not prove that it's a matriarchy, but it does suggest that the society was matrilineal, which means that possessions and power are passed on through the mother's side of the family. And then, of course, a patriarchy would be when the power and possessions are passed on through the male side of the family. Matrilineal refers to a social system in which kinship, lineage, and inheritance are traced through the mother's side of the family. In such a system, an individual belongs to their mother's descent group, and property, titles, and social status are typically passed down through the female line. According to Archaeological News from an article in June 2025, a study published in Science magazine confirms long-standing speculations that women were at the center of this ancient society, making it the oldest known example of a female-centered social structure supported by DNA evidence. Even more compelling was the evidence of preferential treatment in burial customs. Genetic analysis revealed that girls and women received significantly more grave goods than males, up to 5 times as many. So the mystery of this wonderful statue and of the society at Catalhoyuk continues. As I mentioned earlier, the people at Catalhoyuk painted images on their interior walls like we do to decorate, or at least it's presumed it's like we do to decorate. But their images might be things like this, which it's a little hard to tell, but this shows a deer hunt. The deer is on the left, and you can see the people are hunting it. And there are other images that show geometric designs. One image is perhaps an image of a nearby volcano, and they painted handprints that we're going to see in the next slide. See the handprints going across the top here. And I'm fascinated by Neolithic and prehistoric caves and the images that are in these caves. It's fascinating to me to consider what these ancient people, what their lives were like, and what they might have been trying to communicate to us with images like these handprints. So the volcano that I mentioned earlier, that might just have been decoration or the geometric figures, but it also could have been, I mean, if you live near a volcano, it probably has a lot more meaning than if you just have a nice painting of a volcano in your house today. At Catalhoyuk, handprints appear mainly as red or ochre-colored prints on interior walls, and they are generally understood as part of the site's broader symbolic and ritual art tradition rather than simple decorations. So think about this. Why would a person place an image of their hand on the wall of their structure? Some of these structures are believed to have been their homes, but others were almost certainly ritual areas. Some of the possibilities are it's a simple form of marking their presence. So they would leave their mark, possibly during house building or ritual moments or social gatherings. Why would an ancient person think about leaving their mark? Another possible meaning of the handprints is that the people of Catalhoyuk decorated walls with vultures, geometric patterns, bull horns, and other symbols. Handprints placed deliberately among these may have had a ritual significance, perhaps marking a blessing, protection, or participation in a ceremony. Another possibility for why these handprints were placed here is that, as I mentioned earlier, at Catalhoyuk, residents buried their deceased relatives beneath the floors of their house, and they may have carried out symbolic activities in their houses. Handprints may have been tied to these practices, possibly representing the living interaction with ancestors or marking transitions like birth, death, or maybe a renewal of their home. Like most Neolithic art, handprints don't come with written explanations. So we can just consider what are some plausible interpretations. What does seem to be clear, though, is that these handprints were intentional, they were meaningful to the person who placed them there, and they integrated into a rich visual culture that blurred the boundaries between daily life and ritual. So this is our introduction to Catalhoyuk, and there is an outstanding museum there, and I really recommend a visit to this amazing site. So now we're going to move forward in time to our next stop, and you can see we're keeping the blue area at Istanbul, which was the beginning of it was where our journey began on our Rosicrucian journey, but it's also easy to identify. So you're seeing now, this shows where our next stop is, and this is at a place called Pergamon. There were several very important cities in what is now Turkey that were inhabited and ruled by Greeks and later by Romans. This was in the 8th to the 6th centuries BCE. Greek people from mainland Greece founded numerous colonies on the Aegean coast of Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, because there was overpopulation in Greece, to find new trade opportunities, and to find land that was similar to their homeland of Greece. These colonies grew into wealthy and important cities like Miletus and Byzantium. And Byzantium later became Constantinople, which later became Istanbul. So Pergamon was one of the most important cities of the ancient Greek world and was later a major center of Roman Asia Minor. It flourished especially from the 3rd to the 2nd century BCE under the Attalid dynasty, who transformed it into a political, cultural, and artistic powerhouse. The Acropolis held the Great Altar of Zeus, which we will now see. This is the original Great Altar of Zeus, and it is massive. And where you're seeing it now is not in its original location in Turkey. It is in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And the next image shows what that site looks like in Turkey. This temple was cut from its original location and moved to Berlin and is now in the Pergamon Museum. Pergamon was very important. It had the library, which reportedly housed 200,000 scrolls. The Great Altar of Zeus, which we just looked at, was described as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world by 3 known classical lists. However, the area that most interested me was the Asclepien that we will see now, which was one of the most important healing centers in the ancient world. For more than 800 years, the ancient Greeks and later the Romans established healing centers called Asclepieia. And these were named after the Greek god of medicine and healing, Asclepius. A lot of us have heard of Asclepius. And these healing centers created conditions conducive to holistic healing and radiant health. Their focus was on diet, exercise, and a healthy lifestyle with an emphasis on harmony of the whole self, including the spiritual self. More than 300 ancient Asclepia have been located, and the most well-known are in Epidaurus, Greece, Pergamon, which we visited, and on the island of Kos in Turkey. Most were in secluded natural settings with inspiring views next to a spring with fresh breezes in the middle of a sacred grove. The ancient Greeks recognized the therapeutic value of the natural environment. This is the natural spring that people would go to before they went into the healing center. The Asclepian buildings that were used here were called temples. The patient's experiences and interactions were highly ritualized. Asclepius was the son of Apollo, the god of the sun and light, music and poetry, healing, prophecy, knowledge, order, and beauty. His mother was a mortal princess. Apollo took Asclepius at birth and apprenticed him to the wise centaur Chiron, who taught him the healing arts in order to reduce the suffering of mortals. Asclepius's children included Panacea, who is the goddess of universal remedies, Hygeia, who is the goddess of good health, cleanliness, and hygiene, Iasu, the goddess of recuperation, and Acesso, the goddess of the healing process, along with others. So these were the children of Asclepius. Hippocrates, Apollonius of Tyana, and Galen were all healers in ancient Asclepion, in these temples. And Galen lived in Pergamon, and he practiced medicine here at this Asclepion. There were several steps to the healing process. First, there was purification, including therapeutic baths and a clean diet. Then the patient was encouraged to go deeply within themselves, and this was a time for rest and relaxation. The Asclepia typically included a theater for musical and theatrical performances and a large library. So this treated the entire person and put them in a beautiful natural setting. There were musical and theatrical performances, a library, so it treated all aspects of the person. After the initial practical treatments, such as natural remedies and even simple surgery sometimes, the patient entered a state of deep sleep and dreaming in an incubation chamber called an abaton. Sometimes the patient was healed during the dream experience. It was believed that they were visited by Asclepius or one of his daughters in their dream and were healed by them. In other cases, the dream guided the next phase of the patient's treatment, including a preview of the progress of the health challenge and what could be done about it. So part of the healing was a dream state. The ancient Asclepia promoted a sense of peace, mental well-being, and optimism for the patients, which the ancient Greeks knew were essential for the patient's rapid and thorough recovery and ongoing radiant health. So during our Rosicrucian journey, we spent the bulk of our time in Pergamon in the Asclepian Healing Center. And after that, we practiced the Rosicrucian techniques for remembering our dreams, and later we shared the results. And in the latest issue of the Rosicrucian Digest, there's an excellent article on the Rosicrucian perspective on dreams. It's Transcendental Amnesia is the name of the article in the Rosicrucian Digest. Next, we visited Ephesus. And Ephesus is more well known for its role in early Christianity. Here we have the Church of the Virgin Mary, where two important councils were held. The apostles Paul and John both lived in Ephesus at different times and helped to spread Christianity. In the Bible, Paul addressed one of his epistles to the people of Ephesus. Ephesus was a wealthy and vibrant international port at the time, and it was an important place to introduce and spread Christianity. In earlier times, though, the monumental Temple of Artemis, which we'll see now, was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. It was the largest building in the Greek world. It held immense religious significance and attracted pilgrims from far and wide. The massive temple, which was made entirely of marble, was 377 feet long by 180 feet wide, with 127 marble columns, each around 60 feet tall. The temple was built by King Croesus of Lydia around 550 BCE on top of an earlier temple. Artemis was one of the 12 Olympian deities in Greek mythology. In the next image, we'll see her as the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, childbirth, and the moon, and she was revered for her role as the guardian of women and young girls and for protecting animals. However, as we'll see in the next image, in Ephesus, she was depicted and revered as an ancient Anatolian mother goddess figure. And her statue here reflected that very old, very local identity. Within the temple was a large temple of Artemis with jewels and precious metals, which was believed to have descended from the spiritual world. It was copied in ancient times. The original no longer exists, but this statue that we're seeing here, which is as tall as I am, is ancient, and it's a copy of the original that was destroyed. The most famous feature is the rows of rounded objects on her torso. Scholars have identified the rows of pendant objects on her torso as breast, eggs, beehives, or there's some other theories on what these objects would have been. To the Ephesians, the people of Ephesus, Artemis was the deity of fertility, the protector of women and childbirth, the guardian of the city, and the provider of prosperity. Next, we're going to visit Mount Nemrut. And this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And on top of the peak, the highest peak of the Eastern Taurus mountain range in southeast Turkey, the king of the Commagene Kingdom built a monument. It's both a temple and a tomb and a house for the deities on the top of this mountain. And then they placed crushed rock so you cannot walk on the upper part of this. And there were statues here of the god Zeus, of King Antiochus, and of the woman that you see here on the right. These were originally, the heads were on bodies, stone bodies that were seated. These are massive statues. And the person that you see on the right, the head that you see on the right is Tyche, Tyche, who was a force, sometimes called a goddess, whom the ancient Greeks believed determines our fate. So on the left is King Antiochus, and on the right is Tyche. She was worshipped for hundreds of years. Her Roman counterpart was Fortuna, and we've probably heard more about Fortuna. Both the Greeks and the Romans believed that most of our fate, both good and bad, was out of our hands, and that there was either a force or a goddess who controlled our fate. And this always reminds me of the Serenity Prayer. The Serenity Prayer was written in the 1930s by Reinhold Niebuhr, and he was an American theologian and ethicist who was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And here is the version used in Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step recovery program. God, or the divine, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So I invite you to consider this now. And this is related to Tyche or Fortuna. How much do we really have control over? Or is there another force that controls our fate? So what is something that you can accept that you cannot change? Think of something that you just have to accept. You cannot change it. Now, what is something that you can have the courage to change? What's something that you can change through courage? And now see yourself knowing the difference. Okay, now we're going to move on. Next, we're visiting Konya. And here, Rumi lived. He was born in present-day Afghanistan, but when he was 8 years old, his family was forced to flee the Mongol invasion and move to Konya. He lived the rest of his life there. Rumi's father was a mystic and a scholar. He became the head of a dervish college, which is a divinity school. And when his father died, Rumi succeeded him. Rumi would often read to his students from his father's mystical diary. Rumi was a respected religious leader. However, everything changed when he met a wandering dervish named Shams, whose friendship sparked a deep spiritual awakening. Shams led Rumi to make a choice between scholarship through text or living sacred experience. Later, Shams disappeared without a trace. Rumi began pouring his emotions and insights into poetry, which mixes stories, wisdoms, and raw feeling, all pointing toward a simple idea that love, especially divine love, is at the heart of everything. Through his search for Shams, Rumi teaches that the quest for a beloved is also a quest for the divine within oneself. Rumi has been the most widely read and best-selling poet in the United States since 1994. And he lived in the 1200s. Rumi wrote, "Love is the cure, for your pain will keep giving birth to more pain until your eyes constantly exhale love as effortlessly as your body yields its scent." Now we're going to watch a brief video around the poem that Rumi wrote called "How Does the Divine Keep from Fainting?" The wonder of water moving over that rock in the stream justifies its existence. The swish of a horse's tail. Again, I am stunned by the grandeur of the unseen one that governs all movement. I resist looking at the palms of my hands sometimes. Have you ever gotten breathless before a beautiful face? For I see you there, my dear. There is a wonderful problem waiting for you that the divine and I share. How to keep from fainting when we see each other. In truth, how does God keep from fainting looking at himself all day? Light is moving like a stream, and the myriad celestial beings applaud. Next, we're going to share the 7 principles of Rumi. Just open yourself to this message, please. In generosity and helping others, be like a river. In compassion and grace, be like the sun. In concealing others' faults, be like the night. In anger and fury, be like the dead. In modesty and humility, be like the soil. In tolerance, be like the ocean. Either you appear as you are, or be as you appear. During his lifetime, Rumi was known to whirl in spiritual ecstasy while reciting poetry, but it wasn't yet a formal ritual or an organized group. After his transition, his followers, especially his son, developed his teachings into the Mevlevi order, which turned the whirling into a structured ceremony. We can see that here. So Rumi inspired it, and his spiritual energy is at the heart of it, but the whirling dervish tradition as we know it was shaped by those who came after him. Turkey has a number of important sites in Judaism and Christianity. This is an image of the cave where Abraham was born in Sanliurfa. Sanliurfa. So that's a hard one for me to say. It's a sacred site in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Next, we'll see Mount Ararat. In the book of Genesis, the mountains of Ararat is the term used to designate the region in which Noah's Ark came to rest after the Great Flood. It is Turkey's highest peak at 16,854 feet. It is a snow-capped, dormant volcano. The name Ararat, as it appears in the Bible, is the Hebrew equivalent of Urartu, the Assyro-Babylonian name of a kingdom that flourished from the 9th to the 7th centuries BCE. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, Ararat is sacred to the Armenians, who believe themselves to be the first race of humans to appear in the world after the flood. And a Persian legend refers to the Ararat as the cradle of the human race. The 7 churches of Asia Minor are the ancient cities of Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamon, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, which are featured in the book of Revelation in the Bible. These cities, located in modern-day Western Turkey, were historically important centers of trade and culture and are now pilgrimage sites for many Christians. The Roman Emperor Constantine I became a supporter of Christianity, but whether he really converted in a personal spiritual sense is something historians still debate. Some think that he embraced Christianity at least partly for political unity, since the Roman Empire was fractured and the Christian community was growing and well organized. What we do know, though, is that Constantine issued the Edict of Milan in 313 of the Common Era, which legalized Christianity and ended Roman persecution. As we all know, the Romans meant it when they persecuted people. Think of torture on a cross or gladiator battles in the Colosseum, so this edict was life-changing for so many people. Constantine gave the church major privileges. He funded building projects and played a key role in shaping Christian doctrine, such as calling the Council of Nicaea in 325. Constantine was baptized on his deathbed in 337. So some people say, well, maybe he wasn't really that committed to Christianity. However, it was common at that time to be baptized at the end of your life, since many people delayed baptism in case they got baptized and then they did something else. This way, you'd be covered for everything that happened in your life. Constantine's support didn't just change an empire, it fundamentally altered the trajectory of global civilization. His support of Christianity was one of the most consequential turning points in world history, reshaping religion, politics, culture, and even everyday life. And this led to a number of effects. Christianity shifted from being a persecuted minority to an imperial religion. The Roman Empire became a carrier of Christian culture. The church became a major political player. Christian doctrine was formalized. Art, architecture, and culture were transformed. This led to long-term religious dominance in Europe. and then it indirectly shaped global history. Constantine chose the former Greek city of Byzantium as his new capital for a number of reasons. For political reasons, strategic, economic, and symbolic reasons. It was the perfect location. Constantinople, which today is called Istanbul, is in a place between Europe and Asia, and they control the key land routes and the vital waterway between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. So this made it easy to, excuse me, pardon me, it made it easy to defend, and it was ideal for trade, taxation, and military movement. There were military advantages for choosing Byzantium, now called Constantinople. Military advantages, there was economic power there. Rome was no longer practical. By the 4th century, Rome was politically divided, it was crowded, and it was far from the frontier areas where imperial attention was needed. So power in the Roman Empire had already shifted eastward, and it gave a fresh start with symbolic weight. By building a new Rome, Nova Roma, it was called, Constantine could create a capital that reflected his vision of a Christian-influenced empire without the baggage of Rome's old traditions. And naming it Constantinople also reinforced Constantine's legacy. And now we're going to see a photo of the Hagia Sophia, which is a church in Istanbul. Hagia Sophia means holy wisdom, and it is a monumental architectural masterpiece in Istanbul, famous for its massive dome and its long history. Originally built in 537 CE by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, it served for nearly 1,000 years as the world's largest cathedral and a symbol of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. After the Ottoman conquest in 1453, it was converted into a mosque, gaining minarets and Islamic calligraphy while keeping much of the Byzantine structure. In 1935, it became a museum under the Turkish Republic, and in 2020, it was reconverted into a mosque that remains open to visitors of all backgrounds. And across from Hagia Sophia is the Blue Mosque, which we'll see next, built between 1609 and 1609 and 1616, adorned with over 20,000 handmade blue tiles. It's a prominent example of Ottoman mosque architecture. And then to conclude, I'd like to share one of the most fascinating parts of experiencing this journey was visiting Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is a region of Southwest Asia in the Tigris and Euphrates river system that benefited from the area's climate and geography to host the beginnings of human civilization. And in the green on the map here, that is the Fertile Crescent, which is an area also known as the cradle of civilization for the number of innovations that arose from early societies in this region, which are among some of the earliest known human civilizations on Earth. The word Mesopotamia comes from meso, meaning between or in the middle of, and potamos, meaning river. So it's between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and the region is now home to modern-day Turkey, Iraq, Kuwait, and Syria. And it just was kind of hard to believe that there we were in Mesopotamia, such an exotic locale and so important in the history of human civilization. So thank you all so much for journeying with me on exploring some of the very many wonders of mystical Turkey.